had just some thoughts running really together and forming. I didn't really have an outline until a few minutes ago, and the Lord gave me an outline for an introduction anyway. So I'm going to give you that, and then I'm just going to really just speak to you from my heart tonight. Just give you what the Lord laid on my heart. I'm only going to read a couple verses from Daniel 3. Verse number 12 will begin. It says, "There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the providence of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar in his rage and fury commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up?" Now these men, there were some men that were, I guess, jealous, if you will, of these three Hebrews. And they had found favor with the king and with some people in high authority. So they had been put up in high authority. These men, jealous, if you will, brought them before the king after the king had made a decree, and he had built a statue and said, when you hear the music, you fall down and worship him. Well, these three men didn't do it because they were Hebrews and they served the true God. And they wouldn't bow down. So these men brought them before the king and said, they won't bow down. They won't do as you commanded. Now Nebuchadnezzar was full of wrath, it says in verse 13, in his rage and fury. And he gives them another chance here in verse 15. He gives them another chance. But in the latter part of it, he says, "But if you worship not, you shall be cast the same hour into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands?" Oh, he's supposed to find out what that God is, isn't he? I just want to, if you will, if you want to title it, just for a few minutes, not very long, on the thought, faith in the furnace. Faith in the furnace. I have a short introduction here before I get into the message. First of all, first thing I want to notice about these three men, about these men that were facing a major predicament. The first thing I noticed is they had to fix their priorities. They had to fix their priorities. You say, what do you mean they had to fix their priorities? They had to get some things in order. They had to be ready to stand when it came down time to it. You and I today, if we're going to be able to face this world, if we're going to be able to face the devil, we're going to be able to face the fiery darts, we're going to have to fix some things. We're going to have to get our priorities straight. Right. Daniel chapter 1, a couple chapters over, in verse number 8, same three men, and also with Daniel, were brought when they were brought into Babylon, they were given of the king's meat and the king's drink. But Daniel and these three men refused to eat and drink it. They refused to eat and drink it. Look what it says in verse 8. It says, "But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." And these three men were with him. It doesn't mention their name there, but they also had a purpose in their heart. If you're going to do something, if you're going to take a stand for God, you're going to have to purpose some things. You're going to have to get your priorities straight. That's the first thing you're going to have to do, is get your priorities straight. You can't serve God with your priorities all out of whack. You can't do everything the world does and still serve God. You can't get involved with everything that the world does. There are some things that in the world that we have fun in, whether it's, whether we go out to have fun, whether we play ball or grill out or whatever it may be, fellowship. And there's some things that are not actually bad in the world, but getting consumed in them and getting involved constantly and making them our God and putting them before God is getting your priorities out of order, and you will not serve God that way. You're not going to serve God by putting things before God. It will never work out. It'll never work out because you're going to be focused on that one thing that you have set before God, and you're never going to have time for God. So the first thing I noticed is they had to fix their priorities. Second thing I noticed, they were not frightened by the thought of pain. They were not frightened by the thought of pain. Look here, he tells them, he says, if you don't bow down and worship, he said, the same hour, he says in verse number 15, He says, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. They were promised pain. They were promised pain if they didn't conform. If they didn't conform to the world, they didn't conform to the things which the king wanted them to. They were promised pain, but they were not frightened. They were not frightened by the thought of pain. Look at verse 16. It says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. They said, we are not frightened by the thought of your pain. We are not frightened by anything you could throw at us. They said, we serve a God who is able. We serve a God who is able to deliver us out of your fiery furnace. And he said, but if not, we still will not bow down. And even though we may be in pain, we're not frightened by it. We're not frightened by it. We've got to be able to get to that place to where we're not frightened by the pain that the world promises, the pain that the people in our authorities, in our high places promise us if we don't conform. We can't be frightened by that if we're ever going to do anything for God. If you live in fear, you're never going to do anything for God. If you live in fear of what the world can do to you, if you live in fear of what the devil can do to you, you're never going to do anything for God. And you're always going to be out of His will. So we can't be frightened by the pain, by the thought of pain. Look, they said we serve a God who is able to deliver us from the pain. We serve a God who is able. He said, and if it be so, He will deliver us. They said, but if it not, we will still not bow down. We still will not bow down. They were not frightened by the thought of pain. Third of all, they had faith in a higher power. They had faith in a higher power. If you're going to do things for God, if we're going to take a stand, if we're going to go out and fight the devil and his armies, we're going to have to put our faith in a higher power. We're not going to be able to trust in ourselves. We're not going to have faith in ourselves. There's only so much we as humans could do in this physical world, much less the spiritual world. We have to have our faith in a higher power. They trusted in God. They had their faith in a higher power. They said, if it be so, our God whom we serve. He said, remember verse 15, he says, who is that God? They said, He is our God. He is our God. Amen. And He is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And He will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. Fourth of all, after they had all these three straightened out, they had their priority straight. They were not frightened by the thought of pain. They had faith in a higher power. Fourth of all, only then could they feel His presence. Only then could they feel His presence. Look at it. Verse number 24. It says, Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake and said to his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men bound in the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. Look what it says here, verse 27. And the princes and governors and captains and king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the spell of fire passed on them. I say that's His presence. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? They had him walking around in him. It said he had so much, His presence was so much there that not even the smell of fire had passed on him. Fire is a pretty strong smell. You can smell it miles off. Somebody's burning something. You can smell it. They were in the midst of the fire. Came out. Couldn't even smell it. Couldn't even smell it on them. That's my introduction here, and I want to notice a few things. Just bring it in perspective of our lives. Some things these three men did here, and what many times transplants in our lives. Notice, first of all, not really an outline, but just some things in order that I noticed here. The first thing I noticed here was that they were able to stand even though the storm was afar off. They could see it coming. They saw it coming. They said the king got up, he made a statue, he had a big statue built. He got all the people out there. He said, all right, what time you hear all the music? He said, you're going to bow down and worship Him. They saw it coming. Imagine them three standing there right there. He goes, oh boy, you know what's going to happen, don't you? You go, yeah. You know, the minute we don't bow down, you know what's going to happen. It's going to be some big trouble. They saw it coming. They knew what they were going to do. They knew they weren't going to bow down and worship. They could see it coming. They were willing to stand. I notice a lot of times in our lives, we're willing to stand when the storms are far off. We're willing to stand when the storms are far off. We can see it coming. It doesn't take much discernment to see a storm coming. You can see it coming from miles off. We're willing to stand when the storms are far off. These three men were. They were willing to stand. And we're willing to stand a lot of times during our Christian lives. We see storms gathering. We see the clouds gathering together. It's getting darker. We see it coming. You hear the thunder maybe. See the lightning off. You know it's coming. And we're standing there. We're ready. We're willing to stand while the storms are far off. They were willing to stand while the storms are far off. Then, second thing I noticed, they were willing to stand when the storm facing them right in the face. Standing there right in the face. They were willing to stand. They were willing to stand strong. Look at it. Verse number 13, it says, Then Nebuchadnezzar in his rage and fury commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. They're in front of everybody now. They're out in front of everybody. I mean, the way I picture it, if he brought all the people out, there's a huge crowd out there, and they're all bowed down worshiping this statue is set up. It's the way I picture it. And then it says he brings the three men. Imagine looking around. All the people bow down to look around. There's three men standing up. Three men standing up. The king says, bring them up here. They bring them up, the way I picture it, they bring them up before all the people. The king, right before the king. And look what he says. Verse 14, Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Look what they said in verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. Now listen, the storm's right here in front of them. Right here in front of them. They can smell it. The storm's right there in front of them. They say, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. A lot of times when the storm's right in front of us, we've seen it afar off, we've seen it getting closer, and it's standing right before us, about to come upon us, and we're willing to stand. We're standing strong. You can't even feel the raindrops yet. I mean, they're getting close. You see them coming. We're willing to stand. And a lot of times we need to get to the place where we are not careful to answer the world in the matter which they present us with. We shouldn't have to hesitate and think about it. When they present a confrontation, we shouldn't hesitate to say where we stand on the Bible, we stand on the Word of God, we stand with God. We shouldn't hesitate. We should not be careful to answer in that matter. They said, If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. And look here, they're standing strong. The storm's about to hit them, but they're still standing strong. They said, if it be so, our God. You know, we like to quote these scriptures. We like to quote scriptures. The storm's right in front of us. We can see it coming. We can smell it. We can smell the steam coming. We will stand and quote scripture and, you know, we put our trust in God. We put our faith in God. God will deliver us. We know it. God will deliver us. He will. He's able. And we say that with the storm facing us, right in front of us, staring us in the face. But if not, be it known to thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. We say that a lot of times. We say God can deliver us, but if we don't, it'll all be worth it for him. We say that all the time. Sounds good, doesn't it? Sounds good, doesn't it? Are we willing to do it? Are we willing to do it? We read these books, Fox's Book of Martyrs, of all these great men of God and, you know, just great Christians that endured persecution and many different types of painful, excruciating deaths. And they did it all because they wouldn't recant on what they believed. And we like to stand strong. We like to stand there and say, bring on the persecution. God can deliver us. God will bring us peace. Bring on the persecution. It sounds good. But are we willing to do it? Let's keep going. Let's keep going. They seen it afar off. They stood. It was staring them in the face. They stood. Now look at here, verse 19. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. You know, a lot of times the storm don't look that bad once afar off. Sometimes it may not look that bad staring at you in the face. But as you enter it, it seems to get a whole lot worse. It seems to get a whole lot worse. You know, there's a different perspective of a storm of looking at it over yonder and looking at it straight up. Different perspective. You know, you see lightning hitting down over yonder. When you're in it, you see it hitting around you. It gets a whole lot scarier. Look at it. He said they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men which were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them in the burning fire furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fire furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's a pretty hot fire. It slew the men that carried them up there to throw them in it. It slew those men. Now they're in the storm. They're in the storm. They've seen it afar off. They stood. It was staring them in the face. They stood. They're standing in the storm. Standing in the storm. Are you willing to stand in the storm? Are you willing to have faith in the furnace? Your faith will stand strong once afar off. Your faith will stand strong. A lot of times our faith stands strong, facing us, staring us in the face. But our faith begins to want and to waver when we're entering the storm. You know, these men, all they had to do was, you know, they may have been dragging them up there. They could have yelled out, stop, we're going to worship them. We're going to worship them. We give up. We give in. We're going to worship them. You know, a lot of times if you read the Fox's Book of Martyrs, even the whole time they were taking them to the stakes a lot of time to burn, or taking them to the arena, whatever. They said, all you have to do is recant. Just repent of what you said, and this will all be over. You know, just deny your God. It will all be over. They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. They had faith in the furnace. These men, all the way up to it. Imagine dragging them all the way up to the furnace. Just standing there solemn, standing in the storm. They've seen it afar off. They've seen it staring at them. Now they're being brought into the storm. They're being thrown into the furnace, and yet they had faith even in the furnace. In the midst of the furnace, they had faith. Can we have faith in the storm? Can we stand in the storm? Lightning sitting around us, thunder straight overhead, rain's pelting us in the face. Are we still willing to stand? Do we still count it worth it? It sounds good while we're looking at it. But are we willing to do it while it's upon us? Are we willing to stand during the storm? Are we willing to have faith in the furnace? These men had faith in the furnace. You know, and, you know, it could have been, you know, there was, sometimes people did get killed for Jesus' name's sake. Even in the Bible, some people died. God didn't always deliver them miraculous deliverance. They could have died. They could have died. They were willing to. They were willing to die for Jesus and for God's name. They said, if it be so, he's able to deliver us. But if it not, be it known unto thee, O King, we will not bow down. Amen. They had faith in the furnace, and look what happened. Verse 23, and these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished and rose up in haste, and spake and said unto his counselors, did not we cast 3 men bound in the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto him, the king, true, O king. He answered and said, lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. You know, it's easier to stand in the storm when you have the Son of God with you. It's easier to stand in the storm when you have the Son of God with you. Knowing that you're not alone, knowing that you're walking around with the Son of God in the storm, knowing that you have a strength, that you have a refuge right there with you. You know, and if they did die, they were going to be with him. Right. To die is gain, right? Verse 26, then Nebuchadnezzar came near. Look what happened. Look what happened. Amen. They were standing. They had faith in the furnace. God rewarded it for them. He delivered them. And look who got the glory. Look who got the glory. The Nebuchadnezzar came near in the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God. Look at that. Wait a minute. A few verses ago he was saying, who is that God? Who is that God? Wait, now he's saying the Most High God. The Most High God. He didn't say, who is that God? Look right here, he didn't say, ye servants of that God. He said, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. And the princes and the governors and the captains and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of the fire had passed on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their house be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. He said there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. You know, I can just see it here. You know, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they come out of the fire. You know, they say, King says, come forth, come hither. And they come out, big old smiles on their face, and you know, people ask him, what are you smiling about? You just came out of the furnace. They said, we've been with the Son of God. Amen. We've been with the Son of God. If you come out of a storm smiling, you know you've been with the Son of God. Amen. You know you've been with God. You know you felt His presence when you come out of a storm smiling. Here you go right here. Standing in the storm with the Son of God will always leave you smiling. There you go. And God got all the glory. Amen. If you make it through a storm, and people can tell that you've been with the Son of God, you know that King Nebuchadnezzar, he saw him. He said, I see 4 men loose walk around. He said, the form of the fourth is that of the Son of God. And he could tell that they've been with Jesus. You know, in Acts, there was I believe it was Peter and John, who said they perceived the boldness of these men and perceived that they had been with God. Or they perceived that they had been with Jesus. You know, people will always tell when you've been with God. People can always tell when you've been with God. When you've been walking with God, when you've been in His presence, people will always be able to tell it. You come out of a storm, you're telling everybody about it. You're telling people how God delivered you through the storm. And from the storm, people can tell you've been in His presence. People can tell you've been standing in the storm with Him. And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got blessed. God got the glory. They got blessed. God blessed them for their service. God blessed them for having faith in Him. Sometimes, I told someone just not too long ago, sometimes all God is looking for is for a little faith and trust. Right. For Him to work, that's all He's looking for. That's right. You know, the disciples on the ship, the storm was beating around them. They woke them up. They said, carest not that we die. And you know what it says? Oh, ye of little faith. Right. Oh, ye of little faith. Sometimes He was not willing. Sometimes He won't work in our lives because we don't trust Him. Right. Sometimes if we just put our faith in Him, it's amazing to see what He will do. It's amazing to see what He'll do if we just trust Him. If you just open up and let Him work. Open up and let Him have His way. He'll bring something mighty of the storm. Bring something mighty of the storm. You ever seen a storm turn into a sunny day? Amen. You ever seen it? I've seen it. You know what eventually comes with the rain is a rainbow. Eventually comes is a rainbow. Because the sun's coming back out one day. It's not going to be raining forever. That's right. The sun's going to come out one day, and when it does, it provides a rainbow. And you know what the rainbow is? A promise of God. Normally, well, most of the time, or if not all the time, anytime you come from a storm, the sun comes back to your life, you're reminded of a promise. You're reminded of a promise that God gives that He will never leave you nor forsake you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. He hasn't left me yet. He hasn't forsaken me yet. He will never will. That's all I have.